Thank you all for coming. My name is Tom Blinkhorn, and I'm with the Iliad Curriculum Committee, and it's a pleasure to welcome you here today to hear about ants.
You may have heard Aaron on VPR. He was on VPR this afternoon, or noon. He has a book that is outside, and it's called A Field Guide to the Ants of New England, right here. And it's for sale, and he will sign copies, if you wish, at a break or after the lecture. I should also warn you all that at 3 o'clock, the new Dartmouth alarm system is going to go off, so it'll be a little bit noisy for a few minutes. But he's got a loud voice and he can speak well over. He'll tell you how he got interested in ants, but please join me in giving a warm welcome to the Ant-Man, Aaron Ellison.
Thank you, Tom. I'm not sure if I like that or not, but it reminds me, I've got this set of ant glasses, that I picked up at the entomology meetings this year. I'm going to have to start bringing those with me to these things. Anyway, this is partly an exercise in shameless self-promotion. It's not as bad as when I gave the talk like this at Harvard Museum of Natural History the week after Thanksgiving when it was, holiday shopping season. And then it's really shameless self-promotion. So this is a mix of education and shameless self-promotion. So I'm going to talk a little bit about ants today, about the ants in New England that we have here in New England, why we care about ants, why I care about ants, how you can identify ants and learn more about ants, and how you can contribute to building the knowledge base that we are developing about the ants of New England. The book and the work that I'll talk about today is a joint effort of myself, Nick Gatelli at the University of Vermont, Elizabeth Farnsworth at the New England Wildflower Society, and Gary Alpert, who's now retired from environmental health and safety at Harvard, where he was the pest guy. And he got his PhD with Ed Wilson at Harvard, and now in retirement is an associate at the Museum of Comparative Zoology there. For those of you with Harvard connections, which I'm sure is one or two anyway, the book got a little paragraph review in this month's Harvard Gazette, which we were very excited about. And they made a point of saying that, Aaron Ellison and Gary Alpert, with their Harvard connections and 2 colleagues, put this together. So for those of you who read this, I need to set this straight. So I'm a researcher there. Gary is retired and a researcher there. Nick was a postdoc there and taught there, and Elizabeth got her PhD there. So all 4 of us have Harvard connections. But as Elizabeth said, they only had a paragraph. They didn't have enough space. So anyway, so we're going to talk about ants today. Can I get the lights down a little bit? Is that I don't know if that'll upset the taping or whatever. If I can get the lights down just a little, at least up front, so that the images are a little bit better visible. Excellent. That's great.
Tell me when to stop.
I don't know. It's more for you guys. But we don't want you to fall asleep. I know it's just, I don't want me to fall asleep. That's the real thing, because we just had lunch. Okay, so ants.
Leave it like that now. We can put on.
That's great. So when most people think about ants, probably when most of you think about ants, this is probably what you think about. Okay? How many? Come on, honest. I'm sure someone today is going to ask, and please feel free at any time to interrupt, ask questions, clarify things that are not, ask me to make things clearer. Questions anytime are fine. We'll certainly have time for discussion afterwards. When I give public talks about ants, as opposed to research talks to biology departments, there is always at least one person who says, I have ants in my X. How do I get rid of them? This is the most common thing people want to do with ants, is they want to get rid of them. And this is, of course, carpenter ant damage in someone's attic in one of our nice New England farmhouses. This is one of our New England carpenter ants. We actually have 9 species of carpenter ants here in New England. And the real answer, so I'm going to preempt that question today. How do you get rid of carpenter ants? You call a carpenter. You do not call the exterminator. That is not going to solve your problem. Talk about this a little bit later, but carpenter ants nest outside in the woods, and we all live in the woods because we live in New England. They get hungry. They send their workers out to find things, to make little satellite nests, to rear some of their offspring. And they don't eat wood. They like moist places that they can hollow out, that are soft, that'll be nice and warm and protected. And a really good, nice, warm, protected place that they can easily hollow out is damp, rotten wood. So they'll follow little moisture trails, like in the pipes, in the propane lines, in the electric conduit lines coming in from outside. Find that little crack in your foundation or your wall. They'll creep in there. They'll go up and behind the walls, and they'll find that rotted piece of wall joist, wall 2x4 ceiling joist or floor joist, and say, ha ha. They can't digest the wood, but they can scrape out all the rot and enlarge it a little bit. And it looks like this when they're done with it. And so if you got carpenter ants, you got a carpentry problem. If you solve the wet rot, if you solve the moisture getting into your house along conduits, you'll get rid of the carpenter ants. The other way, of course, to get rid of the carpenter ants is just like out west, where they say if you don't want forest fires to reach your house, what you got to do is you got to clear back, a quarter mile to the nearest tree. If you do that, that'll take care of the carpenter ant problems too, but we're not really keen on that here. This is another way people think about ants. Yeah, I heard that. This is the other way people think about ants, right? There are too many of them. They sting. They're annoying. How do I get rid of them? Anyone spend their summer vacations up on the coast of Maine? Right? And they've got the European fire ant on the coast of Maine, the red European fire ant. Managed species of management concern. It does this sort of thing. It gets picnickers annoyed and things like that. It's not really a fire ant. It's not like the one we have down south that many people have studied and we've been trying to get rid of for 75, 80 years. But in fact, it's not even closely related. It's like about as closely related, this one is as closely related to that one as maybe we are to elephants. But they called it the European fire ant. They figured, wow, man, all the fire ant research down south, there's a lot of money in that. If we call this one in Maine the European fire ant, maybe USDA will give us money too. All right? This is actually an ad that I clipped out of National Geographic for a pain reliever called Lyrica. I don't have that kind of pain, I'm sure, but it clearly resonates. People want to solve that problem too. So that's another way we think about ants. This is how many of others of us think about ants. All right. You all know that the guy who invented the ant farm died about 6 months ago, right? This guy was brilliant. He was absolutely brilliant because he came up with ant farms, right? And all of us, how many of us had ant farms, right? How many of us make it? You can still make them. You can make them out, whatever. When you had your ant farm, you got your ant farm, you had to send away some coupon, you get the ants back. How long do the ants last? A few weeks. Then what do? You get some more. Either you're bored and you throw the ant farm away, or you send in another buck for more ants. What this guy did, he was not interested in selling ant farms. That was the loss leader. Because if he got you hooked on the ant farm, he'd be selling you ants for the rest of your life. Because what he did is he just sent packets of worker ants. No queens. We'll talk about this in a minute. And so without the queen doing all the breeding, all you got are workers living out their lifespan and they're done. And so he keeps sending you more workers. If you could figure out as a little kid, oh, if I can get a queen in there, I'd break this chain of this supply chain. But we weren't all that clever. Of course, the other thing many of us did with our ant farms, and I have to take this poll, right? So how many of you, either in your ant farm or on your sidewalk, saw the ant walking across and took the magnifying glass? And focused the beam of light from the sun on the ant to crisp that? How many? Come on. Honest. What I really am interested in is what I'm really interested in is how many women did that as little girls.
Mostly women in this crowd.
Because usually when I ask that question, it's all the boys, little boys did that. Little girls don't do it as often, so it's always good. All right. So this is the reproductive thing about why this guy made so much money. So the way an ant colony works. So the first thing to keep in mind is that ant societies, and we think a lot about ant societies. Ant societies are one big happy family. You got the queen that's doing all the reproduction. And the queen reproduces, she makes eggs. The eggs turn into little caterpillar-like larvae, which turn into little cocoon-like pupae, which hatch out into workers. And the workers are all females, they're all sisters, and they're all sterile. So they're all working for their mom. And they're all working for each other because you're pretty attached to your sisters, and you want to do that to keep the family alive. At some point in the life cycle of a colony, so colony, you got the queen and all these workers. At some point, the colony either runs out of food, runs out of space. It's getting to be the right time of the season. And the queen says, we got to reproduce this family. We got to make a new colony somewhere else. And so she'll make a new set of eggs that will be taken care of by the workers. But instead of becoming more workers, they will become reproductives. They will either become males or they will become new queens. And you can tell those apart because they have wings, or at least they have big shoulder pads if they don't have wings. And the workers spend an awful lot of time taking really good care of them because these are the things that are going to go out and make the next colony. And at some time, the males will all fly out, and the new virgin queens will all fly out from all the colonies in the area, and they'll get themselves up into the atmosphere and they'll mate. And the males get to mate once. And the queens get to mate once. And after the males mate, they die. Because males are really good for only one thing. We'll get you in 1 second there. And the queens fall down to the ground, drop their wings, look for a nice happy place to set up a new nest, and start breeding. You have a question? Among ants, yes, queens will be the only females with wings. So the workers are females, but they won't have wings. The queens only have their wings to fly to mate, and then as soon as they land, the first thing they do is they get rid of their wings and then burrow under wherever they're going to go, in the rocks, ground, stones, houses, wherever, to start laying eggs. The packet of sperm that they got from the males don't drop their wings, they just die. The packet of sperm that they got from the males lasts them their entire lifetime. So one shot, and you got enough for millions of eggs. The other thing that's really interesting here is that goes along with this, why they all help each other out, is that you all know that we are what we call diploid organisms. We got two sets of chromosomes, right? So we got one from our mom and one from our dad. They mix themselves up and you get recessive traits and dominant traits and all of that that we learned and promptly forgot in high school biology. Queens are diploid, two sets of chromosomes. Workers are diploid, two sets of chromosomes, one from the male, one from the queen. Males are haploid, one set of chromosomes. So the way the queen makes a male is to lay an unfertilized egg. Instead, so she's sitting there, she's got this big pack of sperm in a special space in her gaster, and when she needs it, she pulls one out and fertilizes an egg and moves it through the system. If she doesn't pull out a sperm, she just moves it through the system and you get a male. You know that on chromosomes you've got some genes that you might not want expressed. They're kind of weird, gnarly genes. All those things get expressed on a male ant because there's nothing to mask the gnarly bits. So male ants look really weird. They don't even look a lot like ants. Right? They got too many segments in their antennae. Their heads are either really big or really little. Their bodies are all distorted. They're gnarly little things. So fortunately, they don't live very long. But because of this haplodiploid thing, so you got haploids and diploids, it turns out that the workers are more closely related to each other than they are to either their mother or the absent male. So evolutionarily, you're more likely to help out someone who's more closely related to you than someone who's less closely related to you. All your sisters in an ant colony are almost exactly the same genetically, except for a little bit of recombination. They share most of their genes with each other, but only half the genes with their mother. So there's selection evolutionarily among ants and among insects that have this haplodiploid breeding system, which is all the ants, the bees, the wasps, and the sawflies, which are all in the same order of insects, to have this cooperation in the colony, which we call eusociality or true sociality. You have division of labor, you have castes, you have workers, you have soldiers, and everyone's doing things for the good of the colony. But it's important to recognize, even though we think all the time that ants are like this mirror on human societies, because we see people helping each other out. We see altruism in human societies. Ants go to war between colonies. Humans go to war between countries. We can see these similarities that we don't always like when we look at ant colonies and what they do, and we say, wow, people really doing that? But it's really important to remember that an ant colony is one family. It's not like a human city or a human country, which is lots of families. So the amount of relationships there is somewhat different. And of course, ants are not really all like humans. They work differently in lots and lots of ways. So one of the ways that ants differ from us is the way they communicate with each other, right? Ants don't talk to each other. They don't even see especially well. They got these big compound eyes, but all they really see are gray shadows and contrasts. They don't see color, but they're really, really precise with sensing chemistry. They got these antennae, and they've got these ability to sense pheromones and chemicals. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Among each other. And if you were an ant, you'd think every organism would communicate using chemical chemical communication. And of course, we think everyone's communicating with sound and images, which is why we're constantly listening for radio waves from extraterrestrial intelligence. Maybe we should be looking for something else. So, a bit of shameless self-promotion. So those are some of the cool biological aspects about ants. They got interesting evolution, they have interesting social dynamics, they have interesting ways of communication. There are other really interesting things about ants, and we've tried to encompass that in this new book that we've put together to bring this home to where we live here in New England. And so I want to talk a little bit about both the ants that we have here and the process of actually putting together a field guide, which seems kind of anachronistic in this day and age. We should have just gone right to the app, right? We're working on it. If there's anyone in here who, after this talk, is really inspired and would love to see an app, and who has a really thick bank account, let me know. We've actually gotten bids. Yale University Press is very interested in doing an app because they haven't done any apps before, and they're sort of tipping their toes into the digital publishing market. They're a very wonderful 19th century publisher. We love working with them. They want to get into the digital world. They got some bids to do a good app, like an Audubon Society type bird app, whatever. We're just shy of 6 figures for the app. So app development is not a cheap thing, which is why we didn't go right to the app. I want to talk a little bit about writing a field guide and producing a field guide and what we learned about ants and what we know about ants here in New England. I want to introduce our Ant of New England team a little bit more. I mentioned we've got the 4 of us in this process. So Nick was our data guy, and Gary took most of the photographs in the book. The book has all original photographs of ants in nature and their habitats in nature, so probably 300 or 400 color photographs in the book. Elizabeth is a scientific illustrator. There are about 500 or so original line drawings in the book that help with the identification, and I just suck ants. The 4 of us worked on this. It took us 4 years to put it together. But really, we get the credit, but there's so much, we drew so much on our colleagues and experts in the field. We're all ecologists, we're not taxonomists, and so we relied very heavily on people like Ed Wilson and Stefan Cover and James Traeger, Bernice DeMarco, who do the systematics and who could check the accuracy of the hardcore taxonomy. Some of our colleagues and elsewhere contributed photographs of ants that we couldn't get. It got us out to all sorts of interesting places where lots of state and local permitting authorities let us have access. This is an interesting ant colony here. There's a New England stone wall there for scale. This is an ant mound. This is the Allegheny Mound ant that we have its house, and it's about maybe 1.5 meters across, maybe 0.5 meter to 3/4 meter high. This is the ant that makes this is the Allegheny Mound ant. Formica exectoides, and here it's tending some kind of little scale insect that it's just sucking juices out of. But the way this ant works, we talked a little bit a few minutes ago about ants and chemistry. So, and how ants have these really nice, happy, harmonious social lives where they all help each other. This one's a little different. This one is what we call a temporary social parasite. And so what Formica exectoides does is it finds a nest of another ant whose name is Formica subcericea. It's a black ant in the same genus, a little bit smaller. And It makes small, flat nests, a little bit moundy, but not very big. And what it does, the queen of Formica exectoides, of the Allegheny Mound ant, what she does is she runs inside this nest and she kills the host queen. She kills the Formica subsericea queen. And she grabs this queen's body that she's just killed. She's gotten by the soldiers. She's gotten by the workers. She's made this mad dash. She grabs the body of this queen that she's just killed. She crushes it up, and she covers herself with all the juices. So now she smells like the right queen. So she's masking herself chemically so that the host workers think that she's their queen. And then she starts laying eggs. And she lays her own eggs. And the host workers think, oh, well, she's the queen. These must be the right ones. We'll just take care of them. And as you all remember from the ant farm, the workers don't live very long, a couple weeks maybe. And so as they die off, the parasites workers take over and enlarge the nest. And lots of ants do this. Okay? It's not the kindest social thing, but it's a way to get yourself moving. Tom asked me over lunch why I got into ants. And everyone always says, why would you study ants? You know, you have an ant farm, you roast the ants with the magnifying glass, you want to get rid of the ants. Why would someone write a field? Why would someone care about ants? So as part of my day job, I study pitcher plants. These are carnivorous plants that we have in bogs throughout New England. And over lunch, before lunch, I gave a talk to the bio department about my pitcher plant work. Pitcher plants eat ants. About 75–80% of all the prey that pitcher plants catch are ants. And when I started studying pitcher plants back in 1996 with Nick Catelli, we were doing some work on their ecology, and we saw, wow, they're eating these ants. I wonder what these ants are that they are eating. And of course, we knew nothing about ants, except there are red ones and black ones and big ones and little ones. And so I picked up the ant and I took it into the Museum of Comparative Zoology at Harvard and I said, what's my ant? And Stephen Cover looks at it and he says, well, that's Mirmicka lobifrons. That's the bog ant. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. How do I tell what that is? Yeah, how do I, and he told me how to identify it. And then he said, but you know, the guy who's been working on this genus, Mirmicka, this guy up in Canada, and he's just revised our whole way of understanding this genus. And this species that you got, this is the first time we've ever seen this species in the lower 48 states. Now, part of that was because Andre Francoeur had just redefined 10 years, just meaning 11 years earlier, how we actually think of this genus. And part of it is no one goes into bogs to look for ants. But I didn't know that. I was a young assistant professor. And what do young assistant professors do? They write grant proposals about interesting things. And I said, cool, I got a rare ant. Maybe the state of Massachusetts would like to find out more about their rare ants. Maybe even they'd want to protect their rare ants. I knew some guys at Natural Heritage Program, and I called them up. I said, hey, Tim, I got a rare ant. I said, but before we go to list it, I got to find out whether it's common or rare in Massachusetts. You think I could get a grant from her? She said, oh, yeah, no problem. So, you know, I got enough money to pay 2 undergraduates to spend the summer driving around Massachusetts, and Nick got enough money in Vermont to have 2 undergraduates driving around Vermont sampling ants in bogs. The downside is this ant was common as dirt. It's the bog ant. The upside is we learned a lot about ants in bogs. And then we said, we ended up with about 20 different kinds of ants that we found in bogs. And we said, so we're ecologists. We said, so the ants in bogs, are these specialists? They all bog ants? Or are they refugees from the forest that aren't very good competitors, and they're sort of bleeding into the bogs and finding a refuge there? Is it some combination of the two? Why do you have the kinds of ants in bogs that you have? Oh, that's an interesting question. That fits into all this sort of theory we think about as ecologists. Maybe we can get some more money for that. So we go back to our computers and write a few more grants and get some more money, because it turned out that we couldn't answer that question initially because we didn't have a list of the ants in Massachusetts. We didn't know, you got bog and it's surrounded by forests. So what are the ants in Massachusetts forests? I don't know. What are the ants in Vermont forests? I don't know. What if the bog's sitting in the middle of a gravel pit surrounded by a meadow? What are the ants in Massachusetts meadows? I don't know. We didn't have a list of the ants for Massachusetts. We didn't have a list for the ants of Vermont. We didn't have a list for the ants of anywhere in New England. We only had lists of ants for 4 states in North America, right? The really cool ants, the kinds of ants that my friend Ed Wilson and friends at the California Museum study, the really cool ants are the ones in the tropical rainforest. So we know an enormous amount about the ants of Madagascar, and we know jack about the ants in Massachusetts. Well, sit and resolve that problem. So we got some money so we could do some broad surveys of the ants of Massachusetts. And we had our list of the ants of Massachusetts, and we're like, okay, so Heritage gave us some money. We ought to produce something for them, like a report, publication. And we start compiling this. We said, well, yeah, we could write a guide to the ants of Massachusetts. There's this really nice field guide to the dragonflies of Massachusetts, and that was our model. Blair Nicula, just magnificent field guide. And we're like, wow, but you know, maybe we could do all New England. It's probably only going to be 10 or 20 more species. It'd be a better seller. So we get a little more money. Anyway, long story short, we started in on the ants of New England. And there are lots of reasons, though, that we should care about the ants of New England besides the fact that we don't know anything about them as individual species. Because besides eating your house, and besides stinging your feet, and besides being countless hours of enjoyment for small boys and girls, ants are really important in our lives. So I want to tell you a little bit about why ants are really important in our lives. So ants, most of our ants here in New England live in the ground. They live in soil, and you all see ant hills. These are ant hills of, I don't know, Lasius neoniger, Lasius alienus, one of the common field ants here. Little volcano nests, you all see these, right? And they're real easy to see because the soil they bring up is different from the soil that surrounds them. Where's that soil coming from? Somewhere down underneath. It's the mineral soil, the nutrient soil down underneath, the mineral soil that they bring up and circulate around. Now you all know, because you're all good gardeners, and you all live here in New England, and many of you live in New Hampshire. Those of you who live in Vermont are really blessed because you have great soil. And those of you who live in New Hampshire are not so blessed because we have really crappy soils. And I can say that because I live in the Worcester Plateau of Massachusetts, which is like New Hampshire, and we got really crappy soils. We also know that here in New England, and everywhere where the glaciers were 15,000 years ago, that there are no native earthworms. Right? And so all the earthworms that we throw in our compost or that we get in bait shops are all non-native earthworms. And they all get out in the system and they do all this stuff that non-native species do in places where we don't always want them. So if we didn't have earthworms to turn over our soil, where did that soil come from? So research that one of my predecessors at Harvard Forest, Walter Lyford, did back in the 1950s and 1960s showed that it was in the forest soils that we have here in New England that it's all about ants. Ants make about an inch of topsoil every 200 years by turning things over. Right? And so the way I like to say this is no ants, no farms, no food. Right? So ants are our big soil makers here, and they do this all over the world. Ants are omnivores. They eat everything. They're scavengers, they eat carcasses, they eat seeds, whatever. There's stuff dying around us in the fields and forests all the time. Little birds fall down and die, caterpillars fall down and die, spiders fall down and die, everything falls down and dies. We are not up to our elbows in carcasses, right? One of the reasons we are not up to our elbows in carcasses is because ants eat everything, right? And they're doing a lot of the decomposition and cleanup of stuff in our fields and forests. Ants are farmers. You know, we talked before about ant societies, and many of you who have been to the tropics or watched nature shows know all about leafcutter ants and how the ants, the workers walk out and they make these big mounds, and they walk out and they clip the leaves off the trees. They bring them back to their nest where they grow fungus on top of the leaves, and then they eat the fungus. And you never see that fungus because it's a hyphae underground, but it's actually a mushroom. It's a basidiomycete. This is what the mushroom looks like. I just love putting this in because the mushroom's really big. This is the hand of an 18-year-old student of mine in Costa Rica when we came upon an abandoned nest of Atacephalotes, the neotropical leafcutter ant. And when it's abandoned and you get the right amount of rain, you get the mushrooms. And they're huge. I mean, they're like an Alice in Wonderland mushroom. But we here in New England, we got our own fungus farmers. This is Bracken Mirmix-Pilis. It's a very small ant. It's about 1, maybe 2 millimeters long. The workers are only a couple millimeters long. Here are the queens in this colony. This species has multiple queens in a colony. The queens are maybe 3-4 times the size of the workers, and you can see the distended gaster, which is the egg-producing machine here. These things they make little colonies, maybe 20 workers, 30 workers. They live under little bits of moss and rocks around trees where they farm and feed on fungus. They also disperse seeds. We all love our spring ephemeral flowers, the spring woodland herbs, the trillium, the bloodroots. We have way more of those in Vermont than we do in New Hampshire and central Massachusetts. But most of those spring ephemeral herbs have seeds that are dispersed by ants. And they're really tightly co-evolved with these ants. They want these ants to move these seeds around. So this is the seed of a bloodroot, right? And this ant's about 4 millimeters long, so a little less than a 1/4 inch maybe. And this big blob on top of the seed is called an elaiosome. An elaiosome is basically a big package of fat and protein. And the plant puts this big glob of sweet stuff, for an ant, attaches to the seed. The ants come along, they want to eat this. It's like, you know, going to McDonald's. They grab that, but to get it, they got to take the seed away. And they take the whole package away, they eat the elaiosome, and they drop the seed in that nice happy patch of mineral soil that they brought up from underground, which makes a really nice place for a new bloodroot to go. It's a particularly attractive photo by one of our colleagues, Alex Wild. And this ant, since Frank is here, Frank Bowles, this is the ant that we're working on in our chambers at Harvard Far. So this is our focal species, and we're using this. We study this. We're studying how this ant responds to climate change, in part because it's the most common of our woodland ants, and it's the most common and important seed disperser in our New England forests. So if this species is affected by climate change, the cascading influences on all of these flowers is really important. I mentioned the fact that we know a lot about the biological diversity of ants in Madagascar and a little bit less in New England. So as part of what we did for the field guide, we wanted to find out what we knew about the biological diversity of ants in New England. And yes, we'd gone and collected a lot in bogs and a little bit in forests and fields, but a lot of people have been collecting ants in New England, parts of museum surveys and student courses, and they're hiding in museums and collections everywhere. So we spent a couple of years scouring the New England landscape for ant collections. We went to every natural history museum, university collections, talked to people who had stuff in their basements. In total, we accumulated just under 30,000 what we call specimen records, where a specimen record might be all the individuals from a nest that was collected. So to give you an example, just for Nantucket Island alone, I think this one's Nantucket, we looked at 34,000 individual ant workers, but that's only 2,700 specimen records. So it's about a 10 to 1 thing. So out of about 28,000 specimen records, what we have is we've got 132 species of ants that we know about in New England. Those are the green ants here. We've got, of these 132 species, 10 of them are not native to New England. So most of our ants in New England are native species. And then, using some interesting statistical methods, we can estimate how many species should be in New England. And there are another 21 or so that we think ought to be in New England, but we haven't found yet. And of those 21, 11 have been recorded right on the borders of New England, either in New York counties on the west or on Long Island, or in the Canadian Maritimes or Quebec just to the north and east of New England. So those are the ones that are sitting there on our borders waiting to come in, and there are another bunch waiting to be found. And this is where you all can help us learn more about these. So I want to tell you a little bit about what we know about ant biodiversity and what we don't, and how you can help with this effort, and then I'll finish up with a couple of stories about ants. There are two maps here. These are maps of New England at the county level. And we do it at the county level because a lot of the older museum specimens, we only know where they were collected by county. We don't always have town data, and we don't always have GPS data. So the map on this side is color-coded by the number of specimens from each county. So light colored, in Rhode Island, there hasn't been a lot of ant collecting done. In central Vermont, there hasn't been a lot of ant collecting done. In eastern New Hampshire, there hasn't been a lot of collecting done, but the White Mountains has been pretty well collected. And central Maine hasn't been collected very much. In contrast, Massachusetts, southern Maine, down east Maine, people where old collectors and curators in the Museum of Comparative Zoology had summer homes, those areas are really well collected. Cape Cod, the islands, everyone loves going out there. So that's where we know that's where we have a lot of specimen records. This graph over here is the maximum number of species in each county. These are not the same maps. They look almost exactly the same. What this is telling us, they do in fact look almost exactly the same, but not quite the same. But what this is telling us is that the more time you spend collecting in a place, the more likely you are to find new things. So if you're going to go out on the landscape and say, where am I going to collect some new ants to help figure out what else we're missing in New England, you'd want to go to places that have not been very heavily collected. So as a commercial interruption, Baxter Park has not been collected. Okay? This summer, I'm teaching a 1-week course on how to identify ants in New England at the Eagle Hill Institute, which is in Steuben, Maine, which is right about here. And the week before the course, a bunch of us are going to go up to Baxter Park to collect ants. So if you want to take the course, you want to go on a field trip, here's an opportunity. But that's where you might go to collect things. Collecting ants is really easy. And we're always encouraging people to go out on the landscape and collect ants. This is a group I took out from the Athol Burden Nature Club in central Massachusetts. And so we spent a day collecting in this urban park in central Massachusetts. And we collected there in part because there was this local nature club that was interested. It was part of their 250th town birthday celebration. And partly because this park is one of 2 locations in New England for an undescribed species of ant. We know it's a new species, we just needed some more records of it. So we took a bunch of people out there. This is our standard ant collecting kit. It's almost as good as a magnifying glass as an ant farm. Of course, we have something to write things down with and the GPS. We have cookies to bait for ants. You crumble up some cookies. It's like little portable eliosomes. And they'll come and eat it up, or you can have some oil-packed tuna because they like the oil and they like the protein. little Tupperware container to drop them into, and a shovel to dig them up with. If you get hungry, you can always eat your baits. You want to stay, when you could keep them alive, but eventually you're going to have to sacrifice them. And of course, you're just collecting workers, so you're not killing the whole colony. So that's really important. But you have to preserve them, and we preserve them in ethyl alcohol. And we can always get lab-grade alcohol because we work at a university, but most of us can't, so your favorite beverage will do in a pinch. They're really pretty easy to identify in the field, and in the front cover of the inside front cover of the book, we've got a key to the genera. That's a pictorial key, so that it works. Does it have 1 or 2 bits or whatever? This key is designed to be used with a 10x hand lens, a little magnifying glass, and we tested this key with 4th and 5th graders, so we know it works. Right? We have some partners in the local elementary schools who work with us on this, and so we designed the key to the genera to work for elementary school kids. So in addition to that, for all of the genera, we have line drawings and color illustrations, and for many of them, we have matrix keys where you have all the things that might look a lot like each other all lined up with the distinguishing features so you can quickly tell them apart. In the book itself, every species gets its own species page so that you can learn more about it. We have, as I mentioned, original line drawings, beautiful portraits of the ants, so face on. This is our local vampire ant, so named because of its really interesting teeth. We have some information about its habitat and geographic range and natural history. Most ants, we don't know anything about their natural history, really. We have lots of people who've studied carpenter ants and fire ants, and then the other 20,000 species on the planet, it's not worth anyone's time. We have range maps, so you can see what county it's been collected on. Some species are commoner on the coast, some are southern and northern, some are everywhere, and exquisite photographs of the ants. And for Latin scholars and Greek scholars, of course, everything has a scientific name, and we actually discuss its etymology, where it came from. So people who really like to get into the intricacies of scientific Latin and Greek can learn from that too. You collect them in the field in alcohol, but you want to save ants dry because they're easier to identify dry than wet, and you make a nice insect collection. This is not an ant. So this is, you glue ants onto cardboard pins or paper pins, points. You don't try and put the pin right through the ant body. That just doesn't work. With some labels for information on it, and these will last hundreds of years. This particular box of ants here, I mentioned Nantucket before. This is the original, before we went and did collecting on Nantucket and looked at what people had done, the previous collections on Nantucket had been done in the 1920s. And this is all the material collected in the 1920s in Nantucket on the Natural History Museum there. We went through these, we re-identified them, brought their names up to date, all those sorts of things. Carefully taken care of. Ant collections, like any insect collection, will last essentially forever. I will say, I did mention that the ant is glued to a little paper triangle here. There's a lot of discussion about how you actually glue an ant to a point. Do you put the glue on the point and put the ant on the glue on the point? Or do you put the point in the glue and then put the ant on the point in the glue? It's sort of like Yankees fans and Red Sox fans or something like that. Anyway, when you get that, beyond getting them in a hand lens, you get them under a microscope, and they're really, really cool to look at. These are some examples of some of Elizabeth's drawings. This column here are our 3, 6, 9 New England carpenter ants, ranging from the chestnut carpenter ant at the largest to the walnut carpenter ant, which is the smallest. The only ones that actually get in your house are these 4 middle ones here. They come in a range of colors. They have really bizarre looking hairs all over them. They have interesting sculpturing. They're all different, every one is really different. You got things that look like, I don't know what it looks like, the gamesters of Triskelion from Star Trek or something like that. But just, this particular one, this Lasius plumopylosis, named for its plumate or feather-like pilosity or hairs, because each individual hair is tipped with a little feather at the end. And they're just magnificent to look at. And another shameless bit of self-promotion, actually not self-promotion here, the Sides of the Summer course, upcoming in the second weekend of April 12th, 13th to 16th, is the annual New England Natural History Conference in Springfield, Massachusetts. I'll be doing a workshop on ant ID, and it'd be a great time to look at these sorts of things. I'll finish up with some stories about ants now that I've convinced you that, in Ed Wilson's words, they really are the little things that run the world, and just tell you about some of our favorite ants. We talked a little bit about the carpenter ant. I'm not going to beat up on our friend the carpenter ant anymore, but it is one of our larger, more magnificent ants. And as I said, they don't eat wood. They're just hollowing out what's there. They're making these satellite colonies. The main colony is out in the forest, could be 200, 300 yards away from the stuff in your house. You get them out of the house, they're just going to come back. Get a carpenter. This is the second one that almost everyone has seen. How many of you have sugar ants in your house? Always in the summer. You got the little black ones running around the kitchen in the sugar bowl. How do you get rid of the sugar ants?
Is that the little one or the big one?
This is the little one. Little tiny black ones that run around the kitchen. How do you get rid of those? Glass jars. Glass jars will take care of it, no problem. Just whatever they're eating is something that's not well sealed up. Put your sugar in a glass jar, put your flour in a glass jar, the ants will go away. There's no food around for them to eat, they'll go somewhere else. You want to feed them, they'll be there. But this shows some of our things. Here's our queen. She's huge. She's got the big shoulders because here's where the wings were attached before she dropped them. In contrast, the workers have these little tiny skinny bodies. They're much smaller. We always say that females, queens and males have these big shoulders, but really what it is that the workers have atrophied shoulders, because evolutionarily these are like wasps. In fact, they're derived from wasps, and so the normal size of a wasp or an ant is the reproductive. And the workers have basically lost all this extra musculature, right? So they're atrophied. And then we've got the cocoons, the pupae. We've got some eggs. We've got some larvae. And they carry them around. And they take care of them, and they clean them, and they do all sorts of good things for them. So this is the sugar ant. Its real name is Tapenomys sessile. It's official common names. Some ants actually have official common names given by the Entomological Society of America. This one is the Odorous House Ant. And the reason is, this is how you know you have it. You pick it up, you smell it, and it smells like overripe bananas. So then you know you've got it. This is one of our non-native ants, but another one that's extremely common. Not at all a problem. This is the pavement ant. It's the one that makes little nests in sidewalks and driveways. This is Tetramorium cespetum. It's a European species. We've got that makes colonies of tens of thousands of workers, and they'll fight each other in the spring. And so this is really a really easy one to find and identify, because it's really the only one that'll nest in concrete. But what's really interesting, we talked before about the social parasite, the Allegheny Mound ant. Tetramorium cespetum, the pavement ant, has its own parasite. This is the parasite Anergates atratalis, the workerless ant. Anergates, no ergates, no workers. Because what it does, it only makes queens and males, unlike the Allegheny Mound ant, where the queen makes all her own daughters, which then are workers and serve the colony. Anergates only makes queens and males. So the queen comes in and she kills the queen of the pavement ant, and then she starts laying eggs that the pavement ant takes care of. But those eggs only make more Anergates queens and more Anergates males. No workers at all. And here we've got a picture, it's a remarkable picture by Claude Pilon in Quebec of the pavement ant actually throwing this ant out of the nest. You know, it's just not a happy thing. These, Elizabeth, who drew the illustrations in the book, thinks this is the ugliest ant she drew because it just looks squashed. It's got this big dent in its gaster. She says it looks like a squashed lobster. This is another one of our favorite ants. You saw that one with the triangle head and those funny hairs before. This is Paramica purgandii. We call it the Lady Gaga ant because it's got this really, you know, sort of triangular, angular head, and this really just magnificent, lacy, filmy skirt around the gaster. And we had actually tried to contact Lady Gaga through her publicist, see if we can get an endorsement for the book. I mean, we got Ed Wilson, right? But really, we wanted Lady Gaga. She didn't return our phone call. So we're really just, well, you know, at least she could do a costume for us. If any of you have any connections, please help me out with this. Right? There's another one with big lobes that looks like a Star Trek character. We contacted William Shatner's agent, and he didn't respond either. And that one, to me, given my age, would be much more valuable than Lady Gaga. But for book sales, Lady Gaga would really have it. They're very, very uncommon ant. Very, very rare in New England. They're much more common further south. But just magnificent. Just a beautiful, beautiful ant. This is one of my favorite ants. This is the eastern honeypot ant, or the winter ant, Prenolepis imparis. Up top, anyone know what these ants are feeding on? Anyone seen this in their garden in the spring? Peony. Yes, this is a peony bud, and you all know that the peony buds are really sticky in the spring with nectar. And these ants come along and they collect the nectar. Because it's sugar, and we all like sugar. Prenolepis is really interesting because it's got a special caste of ants in the colony that all they do is they store the sugar. So they take the sugar and they stuff it in their gasters, right? And they're really, really big. I mean, really huge. And then in hard times, when workers are hungry, they walk up to these things, which are called repletes, because they're replete with sugar, and they tickle their antenna and they say, "Feed me," and these will then regurgitate sugar back for them. Right, you know, and there's another group of, these are called honeypot ants in the West that also do this. We call it the winter ant here because it's usually the first ant to emerge in the spring and the last one to go to hibernation in the winter. One of our last ants, this is one of our underground ants, Lasius claviger, a citronella ant. If you pick it up and get their colony upset, the whole thing smells like citronella. They feed on aphids that live underground and eat roots, suck on roots. So you all know that aphids put their noses into plant stems and roots and they suck the juices out. How many of you saw the Woody Allen animated film Ants, A-N-T-Z, right? Remember the bar scene? The ant goes to the bar and they order an aphid and they sit there and squeeze the aphid and they drink the aphid, right? They really do this, right? What these things are doing is farming the aphids. The aphids are sitting there stuck to the plant, and the ants protect them and they tend them and they build little shelters for them. And they come along and they just drink out of the tail end of the aphid. So the aphid is basically a pipe connecting plant juice to the ant.
What do you mean by an underground ant?
Well, so the ant lives underground, spends his whole life underground. The nests are underground, they walk around underground, and the aphids are feeding on the roots of the trees underground. You never see these guys above walking on the ground. They're all in tunnels underground, 1-2 meters underground. And in Connecticut, these are much more common further south, although they go all the way up into northern New Hampshire and Maine. You get these synchronous swarms, so you can be in a forest and all the queens and males will come out on one day in October. And the whole forest smells like citronella. It's just unbelievable. It's great. So that's our stories about ants, and it's after 3 and the sirens didn't go up. So that's our stories about ants. Some great movies about ants. You should look for them everywhere because they are everywhere and they're interesting and they're looking at you, so you ought to be looking at them. Thank you very much. I'll take any questions.